All right, and welcome back to another episode of The Aspiring VC. Your host, Matt Snow with Mass Ventures here. I have Eugenio Gonzales from Plug and Play Ventures, former intern at Mass Ventures. But before we get into anything serious, Duncan or Starbucks, what would your preferred coffee be?
Jesus, for a Boston-based podcast, can't really say that it's not Duncan, but I would say Starbucks would be the go-to for me.
Yeah, I am a big Duncan guy, as you could guess, and that's usually my first filter. So we'll see if you can recover from that. But let's just do a quick 2-minute summary. Explain yourself, the firm, and the role that you're in.
Sure. So I'm a principal with the ventures team here at Plug and Play. What I do is I oversee the investment team um, across several different verticals, mainly um, fintech, insurtech, enterprise, and health, where we have an investment team of around 18 people in offices, not only in Silicon Valley, but also in China, Japan, Singapore. We have folks in Germany and Spain, Sao Paulo down in Brazil, and obviously alongside with Cleveland, Silicon Valley being the main one. So really interesting. We have a pretty unique model where we're facing a lot of corporate partners and we leverage the insights that we collect from the interactions between startups and our corporate partners to make more accurate investment decisions. We do somewhere around 30 investments each year solely within my team. And it's pretty cool because we get to deploy capital all across the world in different areas, across different stages. We don't have, for the majority part, we don't have traditional LPs the way that your average fund would, and for that reason, we can play and do a little bit more with the capital and how we want to deploy it in different areas. Call it moonshots, a more patient capital, if you will, but the kind of things that can actually become really, really significant and potentially in the longer run.
And earlier we were chatting about how you guys can kind of compress sales cycles and like help these startups commercialize way faster. Do you want to like explain some of that?
Yeah. So the cool thing about Plug and Play and the way that our platform works is we have over 400 corporate partners. Think of companies like Panasonic, Nintendo, PepsiCo, Progressive, etc. And all these big folks come to us because they want innovation, which is basically another way to say that they want an edge over their competition. So we're constantly sourcing for the latest and greatest that's out there. And the cool thing is whenever we have a corporate partner join our platform, we ask them to designate a champion. So we know that we're dealing with the decision maker that has money in his or her P&L to do a POC, a demo, or a contract. And that way we can shorten the sales cycle. We can reduce the CAC for every entrepreneur, and we can effectively provide them with the traction that they need to achieve the next milestone. So in terms of differentiation, I think that we can provide that reach to our multinational network of corporate partners, and significantly differentiate ourselves from the rest of the VCs out there.
And I know that you guys spend a lot of time in the pre-seed and seed area. How long has that been the focus, and how do you guys kind of view the ever-changing kind of landscape of, valuations and stages and what it all means?
Yeah, I think ever since our founder and CEO Saeed Amidi started Plug and Play, the core of our investments have been earlier stage. We invested earlier on Dropbox, that came out of Boston. So we basically we've always been investors at the very early stage, and I think that that's one of the things that we do best. The names have changed over the past few years, and what is a seed round used to be an A round, and now there's pre-seed and a few things in between. But I would say even though valuations keep going higher, we remain relatively comfortable with pre-seed and seed investments, and then we have some funds that come in later on to double down on some of the most exciting opportunities, which are what traditional VCs would call opportunity funds.
And switching gears a little bit onto kind of like your origin story, like even maybe as early as like hopping out of like high school, like how did you like this is such a hard industry to break into. Like how did you end up doing what you do now, and what are some like the pivotal, experiences that kind of brought you here?
Yeah. So what's funny, I guess, and I feel like a lot of people say this, but I had a non-traditional path into venture. I'm a recovering lawyer, so I spent a number of years doing M&A down in Chile, where I'm originally from. So I graduated out of law school. And unlike in the US, where you go to college and then you go to law school, Chile, and for that matter, because of the continental law that we have there, same as in Europe, you would usually go straight to law school. So you do that for a number of years. You study, then go work for the government, and then you basically end up doing whatever you want. So I always knew that I wanted to do something business related. Felt strongly that I wanted to work within law, and basically as a lawyer, went to work at one of the largest law firms in Chile, then moved on to the largest law firm in Chile, and then somewhere around 6 years into it, I realized that I was sitting at the wrong side of the table. I really wanted to be a part of businesses, but I was too much on the sidelines as a lawyer, and you don't have enough skin in the game. So no matter how big the transaction was, whether it was $2 million, $200 million, $2 billion, you would always get the same outcome, which is you just participate in a transaction, but the upside or the downside of it, you don't get to see it. So I thought to myself, what do I need to do to change seats at the table? And I thought, and so far I haven't been wrong, is I need to do an MBA. I knew I had a background in law, so I really needed to push my the quant side a little bit harder. And so I went to MIT, where I did my MBA. While I was at MIT, I was fortunate enough that I was able to work with startups and a few other funds. So over the course of 2 years or so, I got enough operational experience as well as investment experience, having done a few stints and a few startups on the portfolio side of a few funds, and having worked as the usual, I guess, associate or summer associate, like many people do. And then after 2 years, and I think the important thing is you learn to speak the same language, and at the same time you're doing the job before you get the job, and then transitioning onto or joining Plug and Play Ventures was pretty easy, mainly because when I thought about where can I propel my career in actually making a difference, and I think that this is important for everyone that's breaking into venture, is really thinking about the firm that you're joining and how much impact you can have there. Because a lot of people go crazy about breaking into venture, but don't really realize that if you're stuck at a job just doing spreadsheets or not really, it's not really, I don't know, entrepreneur facing, it's not going to be as interesting as they thought it would be. So Plug and Play is a very special place where you really get to make a difference from the get-go. My first year at Plug and Play, I spearheaded 8 investments, if I recall correctly. And within 2.5 years, I became a principal. And now I'm overseeing a large investment team underneath me, which is pretty exciting. And we get to touch a lot of different markets and make investments and deploy capital in different places. So that's pretty interesting. And fortunate enough to have been brought by the partners there, George and Ivan, as well as Said, our CEO, Neta, who's the president, is also great. And so working with a large team of very talented folks that are really doing something pretty meaningful and a lot of interesting investments. And I think I couldn't have asked for more.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing opportunity and cultural fit, and just a place that allows you to kind of maximize your impact. When you think back to what you said earlier about like realizing you're on the wrong side of the table, obviously part of it is structurally that there's more upside to be made in the startup and venture world, but it also sounds like part of it is kind of based on your personality and what you enjoy. And what do you think it is that pulls you into this world?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say that there's too many jobs, unlike venture, that have the opportunity where you can basically participate in a lot of different journeys with people and at the same time hedge the risk. I think a lot of people are sort of charmed by the idea of launching their own startup, and they don't realize how difficult it is to actually succeed in the world. And granted that the cost of launching a startup has gone down significantly now, and it's now easier than ever to launch a new company, but at the same time, the competition for it is even crazier. So if you were to take a step back and think, where would you put the next 4 years of your life into a company, only to realize that the company the highest chance of it is that it will actually fail. I think venture provides a unique opportunity where you can actually participate in different companies and do different things, but at the same time, you don't have to be solely devoting your time, which is arguably the scarcest resource that is there. Your time, your energy, probably your savings into one thing, only to see it fail. So I would say that venture is interesting for that reason, because it provides a very limited downside, which is there's money, and obviously there's responsibilities and fiduciary responsibilities attached to it, but the upside is unlimited, whereas the downside is pretty capped.
Right. Yeah, I think I've never heard anyone kind of explain it that way. It's really cool to think about the unlimited upside and the limited downside, and being able to be on these journeys, but having the diversified portfolio and not having to be taking the risk of any single one. It's a fascinating way of thinking about it. When you look back on positions that you broke into along the way, including the current one, like for the listeners that are really gung-ho about trying to break into the industry, like what are your tips on networking and finding the right passion and the right jobs and internships?
So I can only talk about my experience as someone that was in an MBA program, and there's no one path to break into ventures, but I feel like there's a few rules that came out of it for me. The first one was to realize that if you're interested in this, you need to go all in on it. And a lot of folks start hedging their bets. A lot of people are recruiting for one job and then trying to figure out if they're going, for instance, like into tech or into consulting, I think VC is interesting. And so what I realized early on is that I needed to go all in. And that meant that, I don't know, people were going to go to bars and do other stuff. And I was trying to get internships, and I was trying to come up with different or interesting ideas and going to events around entrepreneurs and being involved in that environment, which in the long run ended up paying. But I think the first thing was not to get distracted with other things. I recall spending most of the weekends just honing on the resume, trying to understand what's interesting that's happening in the space, what makes Boston, for instance, pretty cool about it, and trying to go to as many events as possible, getting involved in as many competitions around entrepreneurs, and getting to talk to different VCs and really getting involved in it. And so that was one. The other one is you really need to take a step back and realize where you're coming from to figure out where you're going. And earlier on, I realized I didn't have a traditional background. I was an M&A lawyer. I can talk about term sheets and deals, but if you think about the people that VCs can eventually hire, and this is what I usually tell people is, you're competing with folks that have been in the industry longer than you have. So what is it exactly that you're bringing to the table? Well, otherwise, why not just go and hire someone with 2 years of experience at another firm? And so I realized that I didn't have the traditional background. I knew what my strengths were, but I really needed to figure out what was, or how could I bridge that gap in between where I was and where I wanted to go. So I joined a startup that was fundraising in Boston. And that was actually a pretty cool experience, because I got to basically see the inner workings of a startup, of a solo entrepreneur, and how difficult it was to raise capital, but how cool it was to actually build a financial model, build the deck, pitch. We were in front of different VCs, and one of which was Mass Ventures, actually. And they, I was fortunate enough to be able to be pitching to Charlie, who's the current president at Mass Ventures. And then when they decided they liked this startup, I had already built a relationship with them, which basically enabled me to talk about, hey, I know that you guys are recruiting for a summer internship. How can I be a part of this? And that's sort of how I got brought into the process. Fast forward to that, I did a small stint at Mass Ventures, loved it. And then over that summer, we made 3 investments, one of which was an amazing company in you guys' portfolio called Spiro, proactive relationship management company that's doing something really interesting in the CRM space, a proactive management software. And I really fell in love with the team and what Andy and Justin and of course Adam were building. So I went in and joined the next over the fall as I guess, I don't know, I was an MBA analyst or whatever you want to call it. I was helping them out with pretty much everything as you would always do when you're joining an early stage startup. And everyone loved working there. I love going to their office, playing ping pong with everyone. It's a ton of fun. And so being able to have that operational experience, then transitioning into actual ventures, and then having again operational experience sort of allow me to be able to, as I said before, you're able to speak the language, you're able to do the job before you get the job. And then I came across Jeff Fagnan from Accomplice at a class at MIT. Basically approached him when he was teaching the angel list case. So I went to him. We chatted for a little while. He connected me with Sarah, who is now an operating partner at Accomplice. And I spent the next 3 or 4 months basically going to work at Accomplice 4 times a week or so while I was still at MIT. So that's it. I guess the short answer to your question would be avoid hedging your bets and basically go all in, which is pretty much the opposite of what I just said about what's cool about ventures, but it is true if you're job searching. And then the other one, I would say the other breakthrough was just being able to bridge that gap on the experience side and being able to actually do the job before you get the job.
Yeah, I really like the kind of juxtaposition of, venture allows this diversified portfolio, but it's like to even get in, you actually do have to go all in from the beginning. So, it still has some of the same aspects that the startup have.
Yeah.
But, when you think about like the impact that you want to have in the world, like, especially being in the space, choosing technologies for investment, helping grow companies, like there is a massive, real, tangible impact on the world. Like, what do you want to see, founders doing? And then what do you want to be kind of the direct impact from your own life too?
Jesus, that's
I know it's a deep one.
Pretty profound question. I would say what I love about this job is that you actually get to invest and be a part of the journey of so many talented founders. But at the same time, you're only there for their journey. And so as much as you would like to impact or actually do something, you need to always remember that you're in the back seat and they're the ones driving this, right? So at least you get to choose basically, or hopefully if you're in the right fund, you'll get to choose who you partner with and who you invest in. The general rule is try not to back people that you wouldn't want to work with, and try to do as much good as you can possibly by backing underserved entrepreneurs or folks that haven't had traditionally the opportunity to secure funding. So when I look back at our portfolio of companies, I think we have a pretty solid track record of backing minority founders, which is pretty exciting. So if I were to say, what can I do? I mean, I'm hoping that I'm betting or investing in the right companies that are actually going to have an impact in the world. But then again, you need to keep your ego in check. Just because you're a minority stake investor, we're not doing the bulk of the work, which is basically the entrepreneurs are lifting everything, right?
Yeah, it's like that, that Navy SEAL quote, like, who will lift the boats? I have a buddy actually who just in phase 3 of SEAL training. And that's kind of like the founder, right? Like they're dealing with the customer complaints and trying to fundraise and trying to close the sale and hire people. And it's this like insane uphill journey. And it's crazy that people are able to get any of these enterprises to go forward. But yet they do all the time. And it is just kind of amazing. And yeah, I think you have a really good point on maybe the VC industry as a whole could lower the egos a little bit and understand that they're cheerleaders and they're not the champions.
For sure.
But if you're ready, man, we can transition to some of these rapid fire questions I have.
Go for it.
First one is, who has been one of your most important mentors? And the caveat I have is, if you remember like a quote or like a specific action they took that like still stands with you today.
So I think that it's always good to have mentors, but one of the things that I've realized, and this is my only contrarian take on it, is there's so many people that are chasing mentors, and I think that probably the best way to learn from something is just by doing it. And there's no, I mean, and I'm not trying to short sell the lack of people or the amount of people that have had an impact in my life. Is just, I think that at some point I sort of realized that you can try to chase more and have more meaningful mentors. I think Charlie Hipwood within Mass Ventures has been a great mentor to a lot of new people. And I was basically there when Charlie took me in and helped me learn a lot of things. But at some point I realized that if I wanted to learn, I needed to do by myself. And I think that's what's cool about Plug and Play, is the amount of leeway that they'll give you and the amount of responsibilities that they'll enable you to take on early on in your career. People, I think Vinod Khosla says that it takes somewhere around $30 million to actually train a VC associate, meaning you're going to basically waste $30 million of someone else's money before you actually start getting things right. I tried reading as much as I could to avoid those mistakes, but I would say that when it comes to mentors, I would encourage people, instead of chasing mentors and having someone impactful and a quote and whatnot, I would say that the most important thing is just actually go and do the job. And that meaning that if you get involved and if you're doing angel investments or you're getting involved with startup competitions and you're trying to break into venture, just go and do it and stop optimizing for whoever is going to be a mentor, because even then at some point people needed to start doing things and creating things. And I feel like a lot of the change in the recent years within venture is mainly because people are opening it up and you can read everything online and you can learn a lot of things online, but what no one's going to teach you is, well, what is actually doing the things that you do that make you a great investor, and learning from entrepreneurs and developing that eye for talent, that being that judge of character, that those are the kind of things that basically make you a better investor in the long run.
Yeah, and it makes me think, like, if someone who's listening is like a college student or a young, professional in their first couple of years, like, you can invest in startups on your own. You can do a Reg CF crowdfunding round. You can look at 10, 20 companies, write a mini memo, one pager on each one, and pick the best one of, all 10 or 20.
Yeah. So much for the rapid fire, man. I'm sorry I spoiled it, but
the thing is, I call it rapid fire. They end up being long questions anyway, but, disclaimer there. Outside of your own firm, who is one of your favorite VCs? It could be another firm or it could be like just a specific, general partner somewhere that you really like.
Oh, there's so many good VCs out there. I think there's no shortage. I think what Harry Stebbings is doing with 20-minute VC is you get to learn from so many accomplished folks. And it goes back to what I was just saying, right? I feel like nowadays you don't really need to chase a mentor, trying to have one to learn from. And this is especially true from people that don't have a network and don't have the ability to network or have those folks that are impactful mentors. Like, it would be amazing to be able to say, like, hey, I had this person that made a difference in my life in a way that they're mentoring me. But even them, usually the very accomplished people are very busy people. And so not a lot of people get that chance to actually network with them. So you get to learn I don't know. I would say firms like Benchmark, firms like you see what USB is doing. I was lucky enough to have lunch once with Fred Wilson. I don't think he'll ever remember it, but we were a big crowd from MIT. He was doing a keynote there, and then we had lunch with him, and that was pretty neat. But the opportunities to actually do that kind of thing, I think, are not a lot. And so the ability, or even trying to get someone to be a mentor like that, it would be pretty much impossible. So you look up to firms that have an amazing track record, that are building great things, that have had sustained success in the past. And I think that some of those are probably the best in business, and the ones that you get to learn from.
Totally. And there's a little side note, but I will say Fred's blog is so awesome. Like there's so much like news out there, and it's like hard to handle the information overload, but he writes like short, very impactful, to the point. You can tell that he's at the point where like he's not writing to grow an audience. This dude's already insanely successful. He's writing because you know what I mean? Like he's writing because he loves writing, and he wants to give you some little bit of value in a very quick, 2 paragraphs. And I don't know, something about his style. And like I said, maybe it's about that point that he's at in his life, but I just love reading what he puts out because it's just so genuine. And like I said, it's not just filling up a page. So
Yeah.
it's worth. A question I like to ask lately, when you look at startups, what are some of the characteristics that get you pretty excited about a business?
I think a big chunk of it has to do, and I spend a lot of time on the insurance space particularly, but I think that there's so much interesting things being built on financial services that can have a great impact on the world. If you look at insurance and the insurance penetration and how noble of an industry it is, when you bring in everyone basically and gather everyone around a pool and make sure that you're providing for someone that had a rainy day. I feel like that isn't, if someone is working in that industry, it gets me immediately excited. I think it's lacking heavily on innovation, and we're only starting to see more and more interesting things being developed there. We've seen lately our portfolio company Hippo IPO, which is pretty exciting. We've also seen last year we saw Root, Select Quote, Lemonade, and a few others doing things. So when I look at teams, if you're working on a problem that I'm passionate about, it immediately gets me excited. Then what is the team like, and how are they working together? So trying to figure out, do they get along? Are they working on something? Do they know something that no one else knows? Do they have an edge? Are they looking around the corner and seeing something that people are not immediately realizing? And then just because I already spoke about insurance, it's such a massive market that it's something that obviously I immediately can understand how big it is and how cool the opportunity could be if it has potentially the impact that it can have. So I would say that it's mainly around what markets you're working on and the team dynamics, which is probably what gets me excited and what I would like to look for in a company when I think it's a cool company.
I think it's a great point. I think the hedge fund people would probably maybe give the venture people a hard time for not thinking about market size enough at the early stage. Maybe I feel like we harp on, team's huge, you know what I mean? But it's like, is this the best team in the world chasing the smallest? What's that Warren Buffett quote? It's like, I'll take the worst management team chasing the best market over the best team chasing the smallest market any day.
Yeah. I think Doug Leone at Sequoia has a similar quote where he says, even if it's a stellar team, it won't be able to go against a small market, and he would take a mediocre team anytime on a bigger market. So yeah, and it's unfortunately true. No matter how good you are and how good the craft is and how amazing the product is, we've seen in our portfolio time and time again that there's obviously people try to balance out if it's a small niche market, and everyone says like you start in a small niche market, you're a beachhead, and then you expand to other markets, right? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. The initial market, there's not enough demand, the willingness to pay is zero, and so you get no traction out of it, you're out of business. And sometimes a new technology comes up and a market that no one actually realized existed is being created in front of your eyes. And so no matter how small it is, the total addressable market ends up being so much bigger. And that's why there's two approaches to it, which I think it's interesting to balance them out and see which one you feel more comfortable with. When you can take, I think Sequoia is the one that actually looks at the overall markets, understands how big they can potentially be, and sort of take an approach from like a top down view and realize, all right, in this massive market, who is the leader and who is it that we need to pick? And on the other side, you have folks like Andreessen Horowitz that go and look at not the size of the market, but how radical the technology or the underlying technology can be. And so does it have enough potential to basically disrupt the market and create a new market in itself? And so I think if you were to look at it, you're probably going to have answers that are right and wrong in both cases, and that's how some of the outliers are created. You probably would have missed an Uber if you were just focusing on private cabs going from the top down. But if you were looking at revolutionary technologies, for you, it would have made absolute sense to invest in Uber.
Totally. And you know, when you were talking about earlier, you know, associates taking 30 million to get the training wheels off, like I think, you know, what I've noticed lately is that when I get really excited about something, what will most surprise me is probably when someone on the team is talking about when they have better insight. Someone on the Mass Ventures team will have better insight on, oh, you know, this is what it's going to take to have this market develop. Or, you know, this is how hard the sales cycles are going to be with like an OEM in this industry or whatever. And those are the things where I'm like, okay, I would never be thinking about that until right now, because how would you know that, you know, just on the outside, you know?
Yeah, no, it's a matter of that. It's a matter of timing as well. I was reading somewhere that, I mean, the idea of Clubhouse, which is pretty popular right now, it's not a new one. And so folks have been trying to do it, but it just, no matter if you have the right idea, it's always there's a certain amount of luck and timing that goes into it for you to be successful. And so um, I think that obviously has to do with how technologies are actually shortening those cycles for other technologies to rise and build on top of different things. And I feel that you're going to see a lot of things changing now that we're going into a new one where you have interesting things like 5G coming up. Everyone's getting pretty excited about crypto again. Back when I was at MIT, 2016, 17, everyone was crazy about it, and then the crypto winter hit, and no one wanted to touch it. And I feel like it's sort of starting to get back on track again, and creating a lot of buzz around it. So we'll see. But it's a pretty interesting space to be in for sure.
Totally. Well, I'll give a quick shout out to Gary Gensler from MIT. You know, excited to see him, you know, in his current position. And then, yeah, I think to your point on the technology compressing, I mean, it's crazy to think that, you know, the venture industry basically started like late 70s, early 80s. I mean, the modern venture industry. So like thinking about how much development the world has had since then. And then you look at like groups like ARC or like Bond Capital and the stuff they put out on what's about to come in this 5-10 year period. And it seems like we're at this, yeah, this crazy inflection point where the cycles are compressing, and you know, maybe a lot of people are going to be surprised on market timing in a lot of sectors that don't realize just how fast things are about to roll out.
Agreed.
So, you know, a question that a recent you know, guest encouraged me to throw on was actually an opportunity where you know, you can throw a question my way. So I will give you that opportunity.
So out of all the folks that you've interviewed, what do you think is a common trait that has enabled them to break into venture?
That is probably the best question I've gotten.
Hopefully I'm not the second guy that you're interviewing.
No. We're near like 15, 20 already. So I'd say like the common trait is that in their free time, it was this constant networking, and it maybe wasn't even just in their free time. It was just like naturally how they operated. So the amount of emails and phone calls that people are doing, and part of what you're saying with like doing the work, it's just like being in the ecosystem already. Like they just get known by like multiple startups, multiple funds, and they're hustling and they're doing this work. And like you said, over time, you keep doing the job, and then suddenly you just like become what you've been, you know, working at being. And so they kind of will it into being through their actions.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good one.
So, okay, this is a fun one. Took this question from Tim Ferriss, but really love it. What's a purchase of like $100 or a couple $100 that's had like an outsized impact of happiness in your life?
um, yeah, it's not an easy one. I would say I don't. I think it's such a weird time to actually be in, everything that's happening with the pandemic, that what I would have said a few months ago wouldn't actually mean anything nowadays. So it's just honestly getting a nice setup. We spend so much time, and I don't think people realize how much of a sales job being in venture capital is. Um, that I would encourage people to spend $100 on getting the proper gear to be comfortable in, whether it's the chair that they're in, or the right mic, which is the one that I'm using right now to talk to you, because um, ventures, especially at the early stage, it's a lot of spending time on the phone, a lot of emailing, and a lot of time sitting down and just reviewing stuff. So I'd say that the Yeti mic that I have right now is make a huge difference in talking to people and getting that much more clarity when you're speaking with people and making those conversations more comfortable, more approachable as well. And obviously, it's super nice chair because you're just going to spend a lot of time sitting down.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, like, I actually first came across these Yeti mics back in college because I was recording instruments with it. So there, if you happen to be a musician, they're actually like have some good dual use there. So, that much easier to pull the trigger on it. But, lastly, definitely want you to promote yourself. So, social media, email, all that stuff. Where can people find you?
I Yeah, people. I don't know if people want to reach out to me. I'm usually available on Twitter and LinkedIn. Easy to find. There's not too many Eugenios in VC, so always happy to chat with new folks and help anyone break into venture. I think that what John Gannon is doing with the Going VC group as well is pretty interesting, and I would think that if anyone wants to check that out or encourage it, it's a pretty interesting crowd that they're gathering, and it gets more and more strong with each cohort that goes by. So that's pretty cool, and I think yeah, I usually try to talk to as many people that reach out to me through social media, whether they're a part of Going VC or they're just in school or trying to break into venture. It doesn't mean that I have time to talk to everyone, but I do my best and spend a few hours or so talking about it. That again, I'm a mentor, and I believe that no matter what people say, you're only going to do yourself a favor if you're actually doing that job. And it's not, if you, what's the saying? Ask for a job and you're going to get advice. Ask for advice and you're going to get a job. So yeah, there's something to be said about networking and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day is do the job before you get the job.
And I will say, any listeners, if you're not already on this Going VC newsletter, you got to do that right now, because if you're actually trying to get one of these jobs, that's like the place to find out right when they're dropping. So, definitely want people to check that out. But Eugenio, really appreciate the time. It's been an awesome conversation, and hope to do it again soon.
My pleasure, Matt. Good luck. Love the podcast and keep it up, man.
Thank you.
Looking to innovate, invent, and disrupt? We're your partner to fuel your growth. Contact us to learn more.